Ma'am, step aside. The voice was a dull blade, scraping across the quiet hum of the military air terminal. It belonged to a man whose uniform was more starched than his character, a Department of Defense civilian security officer named Miller, who wore his authority like a borrowed coat, 2 sizes too big. He gestured with a lazy flick of his wrist toward a sterile, metallic bench. "We've got a flag on your back. High-density metallic objects. You're going to have to wait here while we get this sorted." The crowd, a mix of uniformed personnel and civilian contractors, snickered. A few of the younger airmen, fresh from basic training and eager to align with any perceived power, smirked openly. They saw what Miller saw: a woman of average height, slender, almost forgettable in her simple gray hoodie and functional cargo pants. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense bun, and her face was devoid of makeup, a canvas of calm that seemed to irritate Miller on a molecular level. She carried a single, unassuming black duffel bag, its fabric worn smooth in places from countless journeys. She looked like a librarian on her way to a conference, not a passenger at a high-security transit point for personnel heading to classified locations. The woman offered no reaction, no protest, no flicker of annoyance, no indignant gasp. Her gaze remained level, her breathing even. She simply moved as directed, her steps measured and economical, and sat on the cold bench. She didn't look at Miller, didn't engage the smirking airman. Her focus was internal, a fortress of composure that Miller's petty provocations could not breach. But from across the cavernous hall, near the command post overlooking the transit floor, an Air Force colonel saw her stance. He saw the way she sat, not slumped in defeat, but poised, her weight perfectly balanced, her hands resting calmly on her knees. It was a posture of profound patience, the stillness of a predator, not the fidgety anxiety of prey. He saw the subtle wear pattern on her duffel bag, a specific abrasion near the main zipper consistent with a repeated drawing of something heavy and angular. He saw her watch, a rugged, blacked-out Sunto with a barometric altimeter, a model favored by individuals who operate where altitude and environment are matters of life and death. The colonel, a man named Jennings with 2 decades of experience moving heaven and earth for Special Operations Forces, felt a familiar, cold prickle of recognition. He knew that silence. It was the loudest sound in the world. If you believe true strength is found in quiet competence, not in loud proclamations, type professional below. Agent Miller savored the moment, a small man inflating himself with the air of borrowed importance. He strolled over to the woman, his boots echoing his self-satisfaction on the polished concrete floor. "Look, ma'am," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "I don't know what you think you're bringing through my checkpoint, but this isn't your local municipal airport. We have rules here. Protocols. That bag of yours is lit up like a Christmas tree on my scanner." He pointed a thumb back at the X-ray monitor, where a junior technician was nervously highlighting dense, unfamiliar shapes. Could be undeclared equipment, could be tools that aren't authorized for commercial or military air transit, could be. Well, let's just say it's my job to find out. He was playing to his audience, the junior personnel who saw his badge and his bluster as genuine authority. He saw her silence not as strength, but as weakness, an admission of guilt or ignorance. He mistook her calm for fear. "So we're going to have to do a full manual inspection, right here, for everyone to see. Maybe next time you'll remember to read the travel regulations." The threat of public humiliation was his favorite tool. It was efficient, it was effective, and it reinforced his position at the top of this small, sterile food chain. The woman, CPO Ava Rostova, though he did not know her name or rank, simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Her focus remained elsewhere. Her eyes tracked the movements in the terminal, not with curiosity, but with a constant low-level state of assessment. She noted the placement of the security cameras, the exits, the locations of the fire extinguishers. She observed the cargo handling crew maneuvering a massive hydraulic lift toward AC-17 Globemaster on the tarmac, its engines whining softly in the distance. Her mind cataloged the stress points on the machinery, the slick patch of oil on the floor nearby, the way a young airman first class was standing just a little too close to the articulated arm of the loader, his attention on his phone instead of the task at hand. Miller saw a compliant, slightly dim woman. Colonel Jennings saw a professional conducting a passive threat assessment of her environment out of pure, unbreakable habit. Ava's lack of engagement was a profound insult to Miller's ego. He needed a reaction, a spark of fear or anger to validate his power. He got nothing, just that unnerving, placid stillness. It was like shouting at a mountain. The mountain doesn't care. The mountain just is. The demonstration began not with a command, but with a sound. A sharp, percussive crack, like a rifle shot, echoed through the terminal, followed instantly by a high-pitched metallic scream. Every head snapped toward the source. The massive hydraulic lift by the C-17's open cargo bay had failed catastrophically. A primary pressure line, thick as a man's arm, had burst. A geyser of atomized hydraulic fluid erupted, spraying across the tarmac and instantly filling the air with a flammable, choking mist. The articulated arm of the lift, now without pressure, bucked violently and then slammed down, its immense weight pinning the distracted young airman first class against a cargo pallet. A collective gasp swept through the onlookers. Men and women in uniform froze, their training momentarily erased by shock. Miller, the man of rules and protocols, stood paralyzed, his mouth agape, his authority utterly useless in the face of a real crisis. He started shouting, but his words were just noise, orders without direction. Somebody do something. Call the fire department. Medics. Somebody get over there. But in the vortex of panic, Ava Rostova moved. There was no hesitation. One moment she was seated on the bench. The next she was a blur of efficient motion. She didn't run. She flowed across the floor, her steps eating up the distance with a predatory grace that was shocking in its suddenness. She reached her duffel bag, still on the conveyor belt, and unzipped it with a single, fluid pull. Miller, snapping out of his stupor, yelled, "Hey, you can't touch that. That's evidence." His words were lost in the shriek of stressed metal and the cries of the trapped airmen. Ava ignored him completely. Her world had compressed to the problem in front of her. The bag's contents were revealed, and they were not the belongings of a librarian. Nestled in custom-cut foam was not clothing, but a compact set of tools that gleamed with purpose. A small pry bar made of titanium, a set of specialized wrenches, a compact breaching tool that looked like a cross between a sledgehammer and a scalpel, and a state-of-the-art medical kit. She selected the breaching tool and the medical kit, her hands moving with the unthinking precision of a surgeon reaching for a familiar instrument. The scene was pure chaos, a symphony of failure. The airman was screaming, a sound of terror and agony. The hydraulic fluid continued to pour out, the mist getting thicker, the risk of a spark causing a massive fire growing with every second. The remaining arm of the lift was groaning, threatening a secondary collapse. People were shouting, running, creating more confusion than solutions. Through it all, Ava Rostova was an island of absolute calm. She arrived at the disaster, her eyes scanning, processing, and diagnosing the situation in the space of a heartbeat. The airman's leg was crushed, but the immediate threat was the stored energy in the hydraulic system. Another uncontrolled pressure release could sever the limb or kill him instantly. She knelt beside the trapped man, her voice low and steady, cutting through his panic. "Look at me. What's your name?" The airman, his face pale with shock, stammered, "Harris." "Airman Harris. Okay, Harris," she said, her voice devoid of emotion but filled with an unshakable certainty that was more calming than any platitude. "I'm going to get you out of here. Stay with me." She didn't wait for a response. She turned her attention to the machinery, her eyes tracing the web of hydraulic lines. Her mind was a supercomputer, calculating vectors, pressures, and structural weaknesses. She saw the one critical junction box that could safely vent the remaining pressure. It was a place no civilian engineer would dare touch, but to her, it was a familiar problem. She hefted the breaching tool. It was perfectly balanced in her hands. She took a stance, the same poised, centered stance Colonel Jennings had noticed from across the terminal. It was the stance of a breacher about to blow a door, a sniper about to take a shot. It was a posture of absolute physical and mental commitment. Then, in a single, explosive motion, she swung. It was not a wild, desperate blow. It was an act of surgical percussion. The head of the tool struck a precise point on the junction box with a deafening clang. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a controlled, deafening hiss, the stored pressure vented, not in an explosion, but in a directed plume away from them. The great metal arm settled, its weight releasing its grip on Harris. The immediate danger was over. The entire action took less than 5 seconds. In the sudden, ringing silence that followed, broken only by the whimpering of the injured airman, every eye was on Ava. She had already discarded the tool and was opening her medical kit. Her hands, steady and sure, retrieved a tourniquet and applied it high on Harris's thigh with a practiced efficiency that was terrifying in its perfection. The bleeding stopped. The crisis was contained. Agent Miller stood 20 feet away, the useless words of his protocol manual turning to ash in his mouth. His face was a canvas of slack-jawed disbelief. That's not possible, he whispered to no one. Colonel Jennings was already moving, his long strides covering the distance from the command post with an urgency that commanded attention. The base medics and fire crew were arriving now, their sirens wailing, but they slowed as they saw the scene. The threat was neutralized. The victim was stabilized, and the person responsible was a quiet, unassuming woman now calmly securing a pressure dressing over the airman's wound. Jennings walked past the stunned Agent Miller, as if he were a piece of furniture. He didn't even grant him a glance. His focus was entirely on the woman. He stopped a respectful distance away, his eyes not on the carnage, but on the precise, methodical way she worked. He watched her check the airman's pulse, the way she spoke to him in that same low, calming tone, keeping him tethered to consciousness. The colonel had spent his career enabling warriors who operated in the shadows, men and women whose files were thin and whose legends were whispered. He recognized the DNA of their work. It was in the economy of motion, the utter lack of wasted energy, the supreme confidence that came not from ego, but from thousands of hours of relentless, brutal training. He knew who she was, not by name, but by tribe. He waited until she had finished securing the dressing and looked up. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something behind the calm facade. Not annoyance, but a weary acknowledgement of the complication to come. "Colonel," she said, her voice a simple statement of fact. It wasn't a question. She had clocked his rank the moment he stepped onto the floor. "Chief," he replied, the single word conveying a universe of understanding and respect. He turned to Miller, who was now hovering awkwardly, the color draining from his face as he began to comprehend the magnitude of his error. "Agent," Jennings' voice was flat, cold steel. "Give me the passenger's identification and travel orders." Now, Miller fumbled with the laminated ID and the sheaf of papers he had so arrogantly confiscated. He held them out with a trembling hand. Jennings took the documents without looking at Miller. He read the ID card first, his eyes scanning the simple block letters. Rostova, Ava. Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. He paused, letting the rank settle in the air. An E7, a senior non-commissioned officer. Miller visibly flinched. He had been condescending to a chief, a bedrock of the enlisted force, a mistake that could have career-ending consequences on its own. But Jennings wasn't finished. He began to read from her travel orders, his voice growing louder, clearer, each word a hammer blow against the anvil of Miller's ignorance. "Billet, Special Operator First Class." A murmur went through the crowd of onlookers. This was no ordinary chief. Unit designation, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A dead, profound silence fell over the terminal. Even the medics paused in their work. There was not a single person in that building, from the lowest airman to the highest officer, who did not know that name. It was the official, unclassified cover title for the most elite, most secretive, and most lethal Special Operations Force in the U.S. military. SEAL Team 6. Jennings continued, his voice relentless, piling revelation upon revelation. Operator certifications. Master Breacher. Naval Special Warfare Sniper School. Honor Graduate. Special Operations Combat Medic. 18 Delta Qualified. Military Freefall. Jumpmaster. The list of special qualifications and skill identifiers goes on for 3 pages. Agent Miller. He lowered the papers and looked at the man, his eyes burning with a cold, righteous fury. This operator's gear, which you so loudly and publicly flagged as a problem, consists of a specialized breaching kit and a Tier 1 medical loadout. Equipment that, as we have all just witnessed, she used to save the life of one of my airmen and prevent a multi-million-dollar catastrophe on my flight line. Jennings then did something that sent a shockwave through every uniformed person present. He turned to face Chief Petty Officer Rostova, who had risen to her feet. He squared his shoulders, brought his heels together, and rendered a slow, perfect textbook salute. A full-bird colonel saluting an enlisted chief. It was a stunning reversal of protocol, a gesture of respect so profound it transcended rank. It was an acknowledgement not of her position, but of her identity. She was not just a chief, she was a warrior of the highest echelon. "Chief Rostova," Jennings said, his voice ringing with authority. "On behalf of this command, I apologize for the unprofessional delay you have experienced. My base and everything on it is at your disposal." The legend of what happened in the Westover Air Terminal began to spread before the injured Airman Harris was even fully loaded into the ambulance. It moved at the speed of gossip, which is faster than light. It was whispered over the maintenance crew's radio net. "You hear about the Navy chief? Took down a hydraulic lift with a hammer and saved Harris." It was texted from the security personnel to their off-duty buddies. "You will not believe what Miller just did. He tried to bust a DevGru operator. By lunchtime, the story was in the Chow Hall, evolving with each telling. In one version, she had caught the falling hydraulic arm with her bare hands. In another, she had field-stripped the entire machine in under a minute. The details became exaggerated, but the core truth remained, and it was more powerful than any fiction. A quiet, unassuming woman had been publicly humiliated by an arrogant fool, and in the crucible of a crisis, she had revealed herself to be more competent, more dangerous, and more professional than anyone in the room. The story became a parable for the young airman. It was a lesson in humility, a stark reminder that the most formidable people are often the ones you would never notice. For the NCOs, it was a source of immense pride, a perfect example of senior enlisted leadership in action. For the officers, it was a cautionary tale about the dangers of assumption and the critical importance of recognizing the quiet professionals who move among them. The security camera footage was pulled by Colonel Jennings' order. It was not used for disciplinary action, at least not initially. It was sent to the head of base security with a simple, handwritten note: "Use this for training." Effective immediately, the video, stripped of identifying information, became a staple at security briefings. It was titled "The Dangers of Confirmation Bias," and it was shown to every new security agent. They watched Miller's preening arrogance. They watched Rostova's unnerving calm. And they watched the moment the world turned upside down. The clip always ended with the colonel's salute, a silent, powerful exclamation point on the entire affair. The consequences for Agent Miller were swift, but not in the way he expected. He wasn't fired. That would have been too clean, too easy. Colonel Jennings understood that true punishment was not termination, but a long, slow, public lesson in humility. Miller was reassigned. He was moved from the climate-controlled, high-traffic air terminal to Gate 7, the commercial truck entrance at the far, forgotten end of the base. His job, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 7 days a week, was to check the manifests of catering trucks and waste disposal vehicles. He traded the scent of jet fuel for the smell of garbage. His audience of impressionable young airmen was replaced by surly truck drivers. The authority he had so carefully cultivated evaporated in the hot sun and diesel fumes. Every day, he had to stand in his perfectly starched uniform and salute the official vehicles that passed, including, on several occasions, Colonel Jennings' staff car. The colonel never said a word. He would just slow the car, meet Miller's eyes for a long, silent moment, and then drive on, leaving the man to stew in the thick broth of his shame. Weeks later, Miller saw her one last time. Chief Rostova was departing on a different flight, and her escort, a young lieutenant, was driving her to the flight line. They had to pass through Gate 7. Miller saw the car coming, and his stomach turned to ice. He stepped out of his guard shack and rendered the required salute, his arms stiff, his face a mask of misery. The car stopped. Rostova was in the passenger seat. She looked at him, her expression as unreadable as ever. Miller, his voice cracking, managed to stammer out the words he'd been rehearsing for weeks. "Chief, I am sorry. For my conduct, Ava Rostova looked at him for a long moment, her gaze analytical rather than emotional. She wasn't judging his character. She was assessing his statement. She gave a single, curt nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was simply an acknowledgement of data received. Then she offered a single piece of professional counsel, her voice as precise and dispassionate as if she were teaching a class. Assumptions are a liability, agent, she said. They create blind spots. Focus on what you can observe, not what you believe. And with that, the car pulled away, leaving Miller standing in the dust, the quiet weight of her words more damning than any official reprimand. The spot on the terminal floor where she had knelt to save the airman was cleaned and polished, but in the minds of the maintenance crews, it was forever changed. They called it Rostova's mark, a piece of unofficial base geography. The broken hydraulic lift was repaired, but the maintenance report listed the cause of the initial failure and the subsequent controlled venting of pressure, which was officially logged as an unorthodox but highly effective emergency procedure executed by transient USN personnel. The legend had been codified into the official record. A year passed. The seasons changed over the sprawling airbase, but the memory of that day remained, hardening from a story into an institution. The young airman, Harris, made a full recovery. The surgeon said the immediate application of that perfectly cinched tourniquet had saved not only his life, but also his leg. He returned to duty a different man. The fear had been burned out of him, replaced by a quiet, fierce sense of purpose. He re-enlisted, applying for pararescue, one of the most demanding career fields in the Air Force. He wanted to be the one running toward the chaos, not the one caught in it. During his entrance interviews, when asked why he wanted to be a PJ, he didn't give the standard answers about service or patriotism. He just told the story of a quiet Navy chief who moved like water and spoke like steel, who saved his life and never even told him her name. He spent the rest of his career trying to live up to the standard she had set in those 5 minutes. Colonel Jennings was eventually promoted and transferred to a position at the Pentagon, but the cultural shift he initiated at the base endured. The new security chief, a sharp Air Force Master Sergeant, had a small, brass plaque installed above the X-ray machine at the air terminal. It didn't mention any names or events. It just read, "Respect is earned in seconds." Assumptions are paid for in full. Every new security agent was required to read it and understand the story behind it. The story of Chief Rostova became a teaching tool, a piece of institutional folklore passed down from one generation of airmen to the next. It was a reminder that the deadliest weapons on the base were not the jets or the bombs, but the men and women trained to a razor's edge of lethality, and they almost never looked the part. They were the gray people, the quiet professionals who moved through the world unseen, their true nature hidden behind a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. They were the living embodiment of the principle that true strength doesn't need to advertise. The legacy of that day was not in the repaired machine or the humbled agent. It was in the invisible, powerful shift in perspective. It was in the way a young lieutenant now looked at a grizzled master sergeant, seeking wisdom instead of just giving orders. It was in the way the security NCOs taught their new recruits to look at a person's hands, their posture, their eyes before ever looking at their ID. It was in the understanding that competence was a language spoken through action, and that arrogance was the babble of the insecure. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a plaque or a story. It's what continues forward in the actions and attitudes of others. It is the standard that endures long after you are gone. Ava Rostova would never know the full impact of her actions. By the time the story had become legend, she was thousands of miles away on a different continent, preparing for a different mission. She was likely sitting in a different sterile room, her bag at her feet, her demeanor just as quiet, just as unassuming, projecting an aura of complete and utter normalcy while her mind silently dissected the world around her with the precision of a scalpel. She did not seek recognition. She sought only the successful completion of the task at hand. Her reward was not praise or medals, but the quiet satisfaction of a job done to the highest possible standard. That was the code she lived by. That was the creed of the quiet professional. Respect is not the noise you make when you enter a room. Respect is the silence of all that follows when you perform your duty with flawless precision. Legacy is not the rank on your collar or the title on your door. Legacy is the standard of excellence you embody, inspiring others to reach for something greater within themselves. Strength is not the power you wield over the weak. Strength is the absolute control you have over yourself in the face of chaos, the calm at the center of the storm. Chief Petty Officer Ava Rostova was a storm, cloaked in the calm of a summer breeze, and those who mistook the silence for weakness would always, eventually, be swept away by the force of her competence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.